The screen went black. Not a flicker, not a warning, just black. 1 second the projection was live, numbers cascading across the wall in clean white columns, and the next second the entire system collapsed into nothing. No error code, no loading icon, just a dead, silent screen staring back at $400 million worth of investors. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then Chairman Kang Do-hyun turned slowly from the window where he'd been standing, arms folded, expression unreadable, and the entire room felt the shift in temperature. Zara pressed herself further into her seat in the third row. Her badge said Analyst, Infrastructure Division. Her hands were already in her lap, already still, already invisible. She had spent 14 months learning how to take up exactly 0 space in a room like this, and right now, every instinct she had was screaming the same thing it always screamed. Do not move. Do not speak. Do not exist. But her eyes had already found the problem. She saw at the moment the screen went dark, a cascading authentication loop buried 3 layers inside the live demo environment. Someone had patched a security update at 11:47 p.m. the night before, and the patch was incompatible with the presentation layer. The system wasn't broken. It was locked. Locked from the inside by someone who either didn't know what they were doing or knew exactly what they were doing. She looked at the clock on the wall. 4 minutes before the automatic failsafe would trigger and wipe the demo environment entirely. At the front of the room, Park Min-jae, her supervisor, the man whose name appeared on every report she had written for the past 14 months, was adjusting his collar and smiling a smile that was mostly teeth and no eyes. Technical difficulties, he announced. Completely minor. Our team is on it. Nobody on the team was on it. She could see them from where she sat, 3 engineers clustered around a laptop, scrolling through logs they didn't understand, whispering in tight, panicked voices. They were looking in the wrong place entirely. She knew it the way she knew her own heartbeat. 3 minutes and 40 seconds. Chairman Kang hadn't sat down. He was still standing by the window, and he was watching the room the way a person watches water to see which direction it flows. Park Min-jae caught her eye across the room. His expression said what it always said: stay down, stay quiet, stay invisible, or I will make what I did to your Lagos project look like a kindness. She looked away from him. She looked at the screen. 3 minutes, 20. If you've ever sat in a room knowing the answer, knowing exactly what no one else in that room could see, and chose silence anyway, you already know what this moment costs. Like this video, subscribe, because this story is about what happens the one time she doesn't stay silent. Her chair scraped back. The sound was small. The effect was not. Heads turned. Min-jae's smile collapsed. One of the engineers looked up from the laptop with an expression caught somewhere between relief and confusion. Zara Adeyemi stood up. She was 28 years old. She was wearing a blazer she had ironed 3 times that morning and an expression she had spent years perfecting. Calm, contained, absolutely unreadable. She walked to the front of the room the way she walked everywhere, quickly, quietly, like someone who was already somewhere else. "Excuse me," she said, not to Min-jae, not to the engineers, to the room. Min-jae stepped in front of her. His voice dropped to something that was almost not a threat. "Zara, sit down." "The failsafe triggers in 3 minutes," she said quietly. "If it does, you lose the environment and the backup. You'll have nothing to show them." "I said sit." "Min-jae," her voice didn't shake. She hadn't known it wouldn't until it didn't. "Move." Something shifted in the room. She didn't look to see what. She walked to the console, pulled the secondary keyboard toward her, and started typing. The silence that followed was the loudest thing she had ever heard. She didn't think about the investors. She didn't think about Min-jae standing 2 feet behind her, radiating the specific energy of a man constructing a revenge he couldn't execute yet. She didn't think about the fact that her hands that had spent 14 months staying deliberately, carefully still, were now moving faster than they had in years. She thought about the code. The authentication loop was exactly where she suspected. She unwound it in 4 commands, restructured the handshake protocol, cleared the cached credentials that were causing the lock, and pushed a temporary bridge between the patch and the presentation layer that would hold for exactly as long as they needed it to. 87 seconds. The screen came back, not slowly, all at once. Numbers, graphs, projections, everything, exactly where it had been, crisp and clean and alive. Someone in the room exhaled like they'd been holding it for years. Then the applause started, hesitant at first, then real. Zara stepped back from the console. She didn't bow, she didn't smile. She moved to return to her seat in the 3rd row where no one important sat, and she had almost made it, almost, when she felt it. Someone was watching her. Not the polite, distracted watching of a room full of people who had just been startled. Something specific, something that had found her and was not looking away. She turned her head without meaning to. Chairman Kang Do-hyun was still standing by the window. He wasn't clapping, he wasn't smiling. He was watching her the way she had just looked at the code, like he was reading something and finding it more interesting than expected. She looked away first. She sat down. She folded her hands in her lap. She stared at the presentation screen and breathed through the shaking that had finally arrived now that it was too late to matter. Min Jae did not look at her once for the rest of the session. That was how she knew the revenge was already being planned. Subscribe, like this video. Have you ever fixed something and then been punished for it? Comment, I know this feeling. Keep watching, because the next scene changes everything. 14 months earlier, Zara Adeyemi had arrived in Seoul with 1 suitcase, 1 passport, and a name that was not entirely hers anymore. The name on her work visa said Zara Adeyemi. The name that appeared on security bulletins in Lagos 2 years before that said something slightly different, listed under persons of interest in a corporate espionage investigation that was thorough, aggressive, and almost completely wrong. She had spent 6 months watching doors close quietly in front of her, politely, apologetically, every single one of them, before a former professor had called her with a contact in a mid-sized Korean tech firm looking for infrastructure analysts. No public profile required, just work. She had taken it without asking what the work would be. What the work turned out to be was this. She built systems, Min Jae presented them, and her name appeared nowhere. She had told herself it was temporary, that she was rebuilding, that visibility was a luxury she couldn't afford yet, and invisibility was the price of stability, and stability was what she needed before anything else. She had been telling herself that for 14 months. If you've been starting over somewhere you don't belong yet, somewhere you chose survival over being seen, subscribe to this channel. This story is for you. The day after the summit, Min Jae called her into his office at 8 a.m. It was a glass-walled office that faced the open floor plan, which she had always understood was intentional. Everything that happened inside it was visible. Everything that happened inside it was in its own way a performance. "Close the door," he said. She closed it. He didn't offer her a seat. He stood behind his desk, a posture she had cataloged carefully over 14 months as one he used when he wanted to establish a physical advantage. "What you did yesterday," he started. "Fix the system," she said. "Embarrassed the team." She looked at him steadily. "The system went down in front of investors." "And your job," he said, his voice dropping to something that was precise and unhurried, "is to make my team look good, not to jump out of your seat like—" He paused, selected a word, discarded it, selected another, "like you have something to prove." "I had 3 minutes before the failsafe wiped the environment. I had engineers handling it. They were in the wrong directory entirely." His jaw moved. "That is not the point, Zara." "Then what is the point?" The question sat between them. Min Jae placed both hands flat on his desk, a posture she had cataloged carefully over 14 months as one he used when he wanted to establish a physical advantage. "The point is," he said, "that you are here because I brought you here. Your contract, your access, your position in this company, all of it exists because I approved it. And when you stand in a room full of investors and make me look like I don't have control of my own team," he stopped. "You make decisions that affect things you don't understand." "I understand perfectly," she said. "It won't happen again." She meant it as appeasement. She said it with her eyes down, her voice flat, her posture folded back into the shape that had kept her safe for 14 months. She didn't know yet that she was lying. Drop a comment. She should have left right then, or she was right to stay. Keep watching, because the next scene changes everything. The reassignment notice came at 4:47 p.m., not from Min Jae, from the chairman's office directly, which was the kind of thing that happened so rarely that Soo-yeon, the Korean photographer turned intern who sat 2 desks away and who had graduated from acquaintance to the closest thing Zara had to a friend in this country, actually stood up from her desk to read Zara's screen over her shoulder. "That's," Soo-yeon started. "I see it. Zara, that's the chairman's direct team. I see it. Do you understand what that means? Nobody from our floor has ever, Zara, been reassigned directly upward like that. It doesn't, Zara." Zara turned in her chair. "I see it." Soo-yeon sat on the edge of the desk, which she was always being told not to do. She had a face that was constitutionally incapable of hiding what it was thinking, which was the thing Zara found both exhausting and quietly necessary. "Are you scared?" Soo-yeon asked. Zara looked back at the screen. "Yes." "Good scared or bad scared?" She thought about it. "I don't know yet." The reassignment was effective immediately. She was to report to the 42nd floor, Chairman Kong's operating floor, at 9 a.m. the following morning. The notice listed no role title, no reporting structure, just a name: Kong Do-hyun, direct report. "Min Jae is going to lose his mind," Soo-yeon said. "Min Jae already lost it. He just doesn't know I know yet." Soo-yeon was quiet for a moment. Then, "You knew he was building a case against you." It wasn't a question. "I've been watching him build it for 6 weeks, pulling access logs, meeting with HR off calendar. He's careful, but he's not," she paused, "he's not as careful as he thinks he is." "Then isn't this good? If you're reporting directly to Kong, Min Jae can't touch you." Zara stared at the email. "Or," she said quietly, "I've just traded one situation I understood for one I don't." Soo-yeon reached over and squeezed her arm once. "You fixed a live system in front of $400 million of investment capital in under 90 seconds. You can handle a meeting on the 42nd floor." Zara almost smiled. "That's not the same thing." "Why not?" "Because code doesn't look at you." Like this video if you felt that. Subscribe, because part 2 takes this somewhere you are not ready for. She took the elevator alone at 8:58 a.m. The 42nd floor was different from every other floor in the building in the way that expensive things were different. Not louder, not more decorated, just quieter, higher quality silence. The carpet was darker, the light was warmer. The receptionist who met her at the elevator bank had the specific controlled expression of someone who managed access to power for a living. "At AME Zara C," the receptionist said, not a question. "Yes." "Chairman Kong is expecting you, second door on the left." She walked the corridor counting her breaths. In, out, in. She knocked. "Come in." His voice was lower than she remembered from the summit, quieter, like it didn't need to travel to reach her. She pushed open the door. The office was corner-facing, glass on 2 sides, soul spread out below in every direction, like a city that had been arranged specifically to make humans feel small. Chairman Kang Do-hyun was standing, she noted that he was almost always standing, beside his desk, jacket off, sleeves rolled to the elbow, reading a document she couldn't see from the door. He didn't look up immediately. She stood at the threshold and waited because walking into a room she hadn't been invited further into felt like a mistake she could avoid. Then he looked up. And the thing about Chairman Kong's attention, the thing she hadn't been able to name from across the summit room the day before, was that it arrived all at once, not gradual, sudden, like a door opening into a different kind of weather. "Close the door. Sit down." She did both. He set the document on the desk and sat across from her, not behind the desk which she registered, but in the chair adjacent to it, angled toward her. Closer than she'd expected, direct in a way that felt different from Min Jae's directness. Min Jae used proximity as pressure. This felt like something else. Assessment, maybe, or attention. You know why you're here. The reassignment notice didn't include a reason. You know why you're here. She met his eyes. You saw something you wanted to look closer at. Something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile, something that lived near a smile. Yes, he said. What did you see yesterday? The authentication loop? Before that, when the system went down, you saw it immediately, before anyone else in the room understood what had happened. He tilted his head slightly. What did you see? She thought about lying. She thought about the 14 months of careful invisibility and the glass-walled office and Min Jae's hands flat on his desk and the reassignment notice and Soo-yeon's face and the way she had said, "Code doesn't look at you," like it was an explanation rather than a wound. A patch pushed at 11:47 p.m. the previous night, incompatible with the presentation layer, authentication loop 3 levels in, 4 minutes to failsafe. She paused. He said, whoever pushed the patch made a very careless mistake or a very deliberate one. The almost smile again. Which do you think it was? I think, she said carefully, I think I work in an environment where being right makes certain people uncomfortable, and I think that a timed system failure at the highest stakes presentation of the quarter is a very convenient way to create chaos that lands on someone other than the person who created it. Silence. Then, Min Jae-sung has been with this company for 9 years. I know. He has allies in 3 departments. I know that too. And you're telling me, 2 years removed from a corporate investigation in Lagos on a visa work visa that requires employer sponsorship, you're telling me that your supervisor sabotaged a billion-dollar investor presentation to frame you for it? She didn't look away. I'm telling you what I saw in the data. You asked what I thought. I told you. Another silence, longer this time. I've read your file, not the file Min Jae submitted to HR, your actual file. Your work from Nexus Digital in Lagos, your architecture documentation, the vulnerability report you submitted 4 months before the breach. He paused. And the investigation report. Her hands were still in her lap. The investigation was inconclusive. The investigation was lazy, which is different. He stood up and walked to the window, hands in his pockets, looking out at the city below. I don't tolerate wasted talent, Zara. I don't tolerate it in my company, and I especially don't tolerate it being hidden from me by people who are using it to build their own reputations. She watched his profile against the Seoul skyline. Effective today, you're assigned to my direct infrastructure team. Your work will be credited correctly. Min Jae-sung's access to your outputs has been revoked. You'll have full system clearance within the week. She processed that. Why? She asked. He looked at her. Because you walked into a room where every risk was stacked against you and you fixed the problem anyway. He tilted his head. I want to know how much of that was courage or how much of it was just better information than everyone else. Can't it be both? The almost smile became something fuller, brief. We'll find out. If this scene made you lean forward, subscribe right now. Hit the bell, because part 2 opens with a threat you never see coming, and it starts the moment she walks out of this office. Elevator going down to clear her desk when her phone buzzed. Unknown number. 1 message. You made a mistake today. I hope you understand what you've walked into. She stared at the message for the length of 3 floors. Then she looked up at her own reflection in the elevator's polished doors, blazer still ironed, expression still contained, hands finally still, and she thought about the girl who had arrived in Seoul 14 months ago with a suitcase and a borrowed name, and a decision to be nothing until it was safe to be something. She thought about Min Jae's hands flat on his desk. She thought about the code unspooling under her fingers while $400 million worth of silence waited behind her. She thought about Kang Da-hyun's voice saying, I don't tolerate wasted talent, like it was both a promise and a warning, and she still wasn't sure which one frightened her more. The elevator opened on the 14th floor. She pocketed her phone. She walked out. Because here was the thing about being finally irreversibly seen. There was no direction left but forward. And Min Jae, the message, the access logs, the 6 weeks of quiet documentation, the 9 years of allies in 3 departments, Min Jae was just the beginning. She could feel it. Something larger was already in motion, and she had just placed herself directly at the center of it. Subscribe, like this video, drop a comment. Zara deserved this moment. What the work turned out to be was this. She built systems, Min Jae presented them, and her name appeared nowhere. She had told herself it was temporary, that she was rebuilding, that visibility was a luxury she couldn't afford yet, and invisibility was the price of stability, and stability was what she needed before anything else. She had been telling herself that for 14 months. Soo-yeon found her at her desk at 6:43 p.m., the floor almost empty, the overhead lights on their automatic dimming cycle, Seoul going amber and gold outside the windows. "You're still here," Soo-yeon said, dropping into the chair beside her without being invited, which was the only way Soo-yeon ever did anything. "I'm always still here." "You fixed the system in front of $400 million of investors today, and then came back to your desk and opened a spreadsheet." Soo-yeon stared at her. "Zara, the infrastructure audit is due Friday." "I don't care about the infrastructure audit." "Min Jae does." "Min Jae," Soo-yeon said precisely, "looked like he wanted to dissolve into the floor when you stood up. Everyone saw it. The whole room saw it." She leaned forward. "How are you not talking about this?" Zara saved the spreadsheet, closed it, opened it again. "Because talking about it doesn't change what comes next." "What comes next?" She thought about Min Jae's hands on the desk that morning, the precise, unhurried voice. "You make decisions that affect things you don't understand." The way he had ended the meeting without raising his voice once, which was always more frightening than if he had. He's going to accelerate whatever he's building, the compliance case. He's been pulling access logs, cross-referencing timestamps, trying to find a gap between my documented hours and my actual system activity. He hasn't found one yet, but how do you know that? Because I've been documenting everything longer than he has. She paused. But today changes his timeline. He wasn't expecting me to move. Now he'll push faster. Soo-yeon was quiet for a moment. "You've known about this for 6 weeks and you just sat with it?" "I was managing it." "That's not managing, that's surviving." The words landed somewhere specific. Zara looked at the screen without seeing it. "Those are sometimes the same thing," she said. Soo-yeon reached over and closed the laptop. "Go home, eat something, sleep, because whatever Min Jae is building, you just made the strongest possible counter move today without even trying to." She stood up, gathered her bag. "The chairman watched you fix that system, Zara. He watched you, and people like Kang Da-seon don't watch things they're not going to act on." Zara thought about the window, the way he'd been standing, the way he hadn't clapped, the way he'd looked at her like she was something he was in the process of deciding. "That's what worries me," she said quietly. "If you're watching this and you've ever been afraid of the very opportunity you've been waiting for, comment, 'This is me.' Subscribe, because the next scene is where everything shifts." She didn't sleep well. She lay in the dark of her apartment, a small, careful apartment in Mapogu that she had furnished slowly, deliberately, with things that were functional rather than personal, because personal things required a kind of permanence she hadn't been ready to claim. And she stared at the ceiling and thought about the message. "You made a mistake today. I hope you understand what you've walked into." She had saved it, screenshotted it from 3 angles, added it to the folder she kept on a private server she had built herself and hosted under a name that wasn't connected to any account Min Jae could access. The folder had 47 items in it now, time-stamped, cross-referenced, a record so clean and complete that the only reason she hadn't escalated it before today was escalation required visibility, and visibility required exactly the kind of risk she had spent 14 months avoiding. But today had changed the calculus. She sat up at 4 a.m., opened her laptop, and added the screenshot. Item 48. Then she opened a new document and started writing. Not a complaint, not a report, a narrative, clean, specific, chronological, of every decision Min-jae had made over 14 months that redirected credit, buried her name, or positioned her for blame she hadn't earned. Every meeting she had been excluded from after contributing the foundational work, every presentation she had built that had gone out under his name alone, every access log poll she had documented him making, and the dates, and what had been reviewed. She wrote until the sky outside the window went from black to the particular gray that came before blue. Then she closed the document, saved it to the server, and got ready for work. This is what they don't show you, the part before the breakthrough, where she's building her case in silence at 4 a.m. Like this video if this kind of quiet strength moves you. Subscribe, because this fight is just beginning. The 42nd floor felt different at 9 a.m. than it did the day before. Less intimidating, or maybe she was different, she hadn't decided, which she hadn't decided. The same receptionist met her at the elevator bank, led her not to Kang Dal-hyun's office this time, but to a smaller room off the main corridor, a working room, long table, screens on 2 walls, the kind of space that was designed for people who did actual things rather than people who approved them. There were 3 people already in the room when she entered. The first was a man she didn't recognize, mid-30s, sharp-faced, the kind of tired that came from being excellent at a high-pressure job for a long time. He looked up when she entered and said nothing, which she read as neutral rather than hostile. The second was a woman who introduced herself immediately, standing up, hand extended. M. Chae-won, Senior Security Analyst. You're the one who fixed the demo. Zara Adeyemi. I know who you are. I pulled the authentication logs this morning. 3 minutes 42 seconds from system failure to full restoration. I've been on this floor for 4 years, and I've never seen anyone crack a live environment that fast. I had context. You had context nobody else in the room had. That's not context, that's architecture. She gestured to the seat across from her. Sit. Jun-so will be insufferable for the first hour, but he warms up. The sharp-faced man, Jun-so, said still without looking down, I am not insufferable. You are famously insufferable. I am precise. Those are not different things. Zara sat down. Something loosened slightly in her chest, so slightly she almost missed it. The specific relief of entering a room where people were already talking to each other like humans. The third person in the room was Chairman Kang. She hadn't seen him when she walked in because he'd been standing to the side of the doorway, not behind the desk, not at the head of the table, just in the room, coffee in hand, watching Chae-won and Jun-so with the expression of a man who had long since made peace with exactly what he had built. He met her eyes when she registered him, tilted his head once, almost imperceptibly, in a gesture she couldn't quite classify. Acknowledgement, maybe. Or welcome. Good morning, he said. Good morning, she said. Chae-won looked between them, said nothing, filed it away. Zara could see her filing it away, and returned to her screen. The morning was work. Real work, the kind she hadn't done with her own name attached to it in 14 months. Kang laid out the infrastructure problem, a critical vulnerability in their cross-platform data verification system that had been flagged 3 weeks ago and hadn't been resolved because the 2 teams responsible for it couldn't agree on approach. We've had 6 meetings about it, Jun-so said flatly. 6 meetings that produced 6 documents that all say the same thing. Both approaches work, neither team will move first, and in the meantime, the vulnerability sits there. What's the vulnerability? Zara asked. Junso slid a tablet across the table. She read it again. This is the same class of exposure as the Nexus breach, she said, not loudly, more like thinking out loud. The room went quiet. Kang was watching her again. You recognized it. I documented something almost identical 3 years ago. She set the tablet down. The difference is the entry vector. This one's cleaner, more deliberate. She looked up. This wasn't missed. Someone decided not to fix it. Another silence. That's a serious claim, Chae-won said. I know. If you're right, I know. Junso leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling. She's been here 40 minutes, he said, to no one in particular. 40 minutes. She's right, Kang said quietly. Everyone looked at him. I've suspected it for 2 weeks. I needed someone who could see it without being told what to look for. He looked at Zara. Now I have one. The implications settled over her slowly. She hadn't been reassigned because of the demo. She had been reassigned because of what the demo revealed about how she thought. She had been recruited. Drop a comment. Did you see that twist coming? Comment, she was always the plan. Subscribe, like, because the next scene is where the danger gets real. She was in the elevator going down to collect the last of her things from the 14th floor when the doors opened on 12 and Min Jae stepped in. He didn't look surprised to see her. That was the first thing she noticed. The second thing she noticed was that he was alone, and he waited until the doors closed before he spoke. I heard about the reassignment. News travels fast. It does on this floor. He was looking at the elevator doors rather than at her. You want to understand something, Zara. What happened in that presentation room, what you did, that was a breach of team protocol. I've already filed the report. I'm sure you have. And the compliance review I've been building, he paused, that doesn't stop because you changed floors. That follows you. Min Jae, she said it the same way he always said her name, level, precise, the affect of someone who had already won the argument they were having. I have 48 documented incidents, time-stamped, cross-referenced, server logs, meeting records, presentation metadata, and as of this morning, an anonymous threat message sent from a number registered to a device on the company network. She paused. My number is higher than yours. The elevator reached 14. The doors opened. She stepped out. I'm not fighting you, she said without turning around. I never was. But if you come for me now, make sure you come with everything you have, because I will not be going invisible again. The doors closed behind her. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the corridor wall and breathed in, out, in, until they stopped. Then she went to clear her desk. If that scene made your heart race, subscribe right now, hit the bell, because the story continues in the chairman's office, and what he says in the first 60 seconds will change the entire story. Don't miss it. Subscribe. Like this video. We'll see you there. She packed in 11 minutes. Not because she had little. She had almost nothing. 14 months at that desk, and what she was leaving with fit inside a single tote bag. A portable hard drive, a charger, a notebook she had never written anything personal in, and a small framed photograph of her mother standing outside their house in Surulere, Lagos, squinting into afternoon sun, laughing at something happening just outside the frame. She had kept the photograph face down in her drawer the entire 14 months. She stood it up on the desk now, just for a moment, looked at it properly. Her mother had a saying she repeated every time Zara brought home a problem she didn't know how to solve. She said it in Yoruba first, then in English, because she believed certain truths needed 2 languages to carry their full weight. Agbara to wa ninu oko kolegiaro kon wasiemole laisi diele. The strength inside you cannot one morning come to light without a cost. Zara had always heard it as a warning. Standing here now, tote bag over one shoulder, photograph in hand, 14th floor humming around her with the ordinary sounds of people who had no idea what had just shifted, she wondered, for the first time, if her mother had meant it as a promise. She placed the photograph carefully at the top of the bag, walked out without looking back. Soo-yeon was waiting by the elevator. She had clearly been crying, which she was clearly trying to hide, which she was clearly failing at entirely. "I'm 2 floors up," Zara said, "not gone." I know that. I'm not sad, I'm just—" She stopped, started again. "You came here with nothing, Zara. You came here with nothing, and you kept your head down, and you built everything quietly, and he tried to take all of it, and instead—" Her voice broke slightly. "Instead, you ended up on the 42nd floor in 48 hours. Zara looked at her. "Don't cry," she said. "He'll see." Soo-yeon laughed, wet and real and immediate. "He's already gone to a meeting. I checked." "You checked." "I have been your early warning system for 6 weeks. I checked everything." She reached into her pocket and pressed a folded piece of paper into Zara's hand. "My number. Personal, not company network. Use it." Zara opened her mouth. "Don't say you won't need it. Just take it." She took it. The elevator arrived. She stepped in, turned around. Soo-yeon was already composing herself, shoulders back, face arranged, the practiced neutrality of someone who had learned to perform ordinary in extraordinary moments. She gave Zara one nod, small, certain. Zara nodded back. The doors closed. She rode up alone. 28 floors of silence, the city rising outside the glass, Seoul enormous and indifferent, and she was only now beginning to understand this, full of people who had also, at some point, chosen the moment that cost them everything and gained them something they couldn't yet name. The elevator opened on 42. Kang Do-yeon was standing at the end of the corridor. Not waiting, she didn't think he was the kind of man who waited for people. He was moving between rooms, tablet in hand, mid-thought, and he looked up when the elevator opened and saw her standing there, with her tote bag and her composure and her mother's photograph and all 48 documented incidents and 14 months of held breath finally beginning to release. He didn't say anything immediately. Neither did she. Then, "Ready?" he asked. She thought about everything that word contained, the 42nd floor, the vulnerability no one had fixed on purpose, the threat message, Min-jae's face in the elevator, Soo-yeon's folded piece of paper, her mother laughing in Lagos afternoon light. The strength inside you cannot one morning come to light without a cost. "Yes," she said, and she walked forward. That's part 1. If this story found you, if Zara's silence, her strength, her moment of finally being seen found something in you, subscribe right now. Like this video, drop a comment. Zara is ready, because part 2 is already written, and it goes deeper, darker, and more dangerous than anything you just watched. The chairman knows more than he said. Min-jae is not finished, and Zara is only just beginning. Subscribe, hit the bell. We'll see you in part 2.